Hey, this is Chris Bergson, and welcome to Coffee Talk.
Hi everyone, I'm Kim Perlak. I'm the chair of the guitar department at Berklee College of Music, and welcome to another Coffee Talk. We're joined as usual by Assistant Chair Cheryl Bailey. Hey Cheryl.
Coffee cheers, the
Cheers.
Berkeley Guitar Department mug.
We both have them. And our senior coordinator Ian Steed is here with us as usual. Hey Ian.
Bill, coffee cheers.
Coffee cheers to you. And our special guest today is Professor Chris Bergson. Hey Chris.
Good morning. Cheers.
You've got a coffee going too.
Indeed.
What are you drinking, Chris? What do you got?
I am drinking a double espresso with a little bit of oat milk.
Yeah, nice.
Kind of my go-to.
Okay.
I live just north of the East Village in Manhattan and near a great espresso place, 9th Street Espresso. So
I
I
can
get
attest that's great espresso. In my opinion, and I bet you'll agree, it's the best espresso in New York City, right?
I was psyched when I became like walking or biking distance from a couple of them. So yeah, no, it's really good.
So, Chris, are you saying that you went out and got coffee already? Did you get that coffee or did you make it?
I made it. I made it at home.
Oh, okay, because that's a endeavor to go out already. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's rainy and everything.
Yeah.
No, I buy the beans by the bag, and I have them grind them for me for an espresso maker, and it has a nice sort of chocolatey taste and aroma. Yeah, if any of you find yourselves in New York City, let me know. I stop on by. I would be very glad to make you an espresso.
That's great. So, Chris, one of the things that a lot of people listening are thinking about is first days at Berkeley, because a lot of people just joined us fairly recently, or they're thinking about coming to campus, or they're pretty tired and they're thinking about what inspired them when they first got here. So, you're a new faculty member, relatively.
Mm-hmm.
Um, can you talk a little bit about what your first impressions were when you got here? Is any stories or anything stick out to you?
Well, I think ended up working out really well that I did the week as part of guitar sessions
Mm.
at Berklee last August. That worked really well as sort of my introduction to Berklee.
Hmm.
Um, so do you mean like that first day or the first day
Well,
of that
Chris,
whole
didn't
semester?
you told me a story. Did you ever go to the guitar sessions when you were a kid growing up in Boston, or you went to the BPC? You told me some stories about that, but
Yeah, I mean, sort of. So I guess my introduction to teaching at Berklee was really that week in August as part of guitar sessions,
Hmm.
and I have a lot of memories of going to concerts at the BPC.
Hmm.
My dad took me to hear Dizzy Gillespie at the BPC when I was a kid. I think it was in 1987. I was in 5th grade, and Dizzy Gillespie gave a concert at the BPC, and my dad took me, and it was one of the most incredible concerts I've ever been to. I mean, to this day, and I still have vivid memories of it. It was just an amazing show. The band also included John Faddis, James Moody, and I'm told by some of my trumpet player friends that at that point in 1987, Dizzy was still very much in his prime, chops wise, playing wise. Um, but yeah, I remember that concert very well because I was already playing guitar at that point and just starting to get into playing jazz on the guitar. And I was studying with um, a Berklee student. As I think, yeah, you all know, I grew up in the Boston area in Somerville, and all of my guitar teachers, I had like 4 different guitar teachers growing up. and all of them were Berklee grads. One of them actually, though I don't, I don't think he remembers me, and that's okay. One of them was actually Craig Halati, who is obviously still on faculty now.
Yeah, he's a professor here, Craig Halati. Wow, that's really cool.
Great teacher. I only studied with him briefly, but I thought of him more recently when Pat Martino passed, because Craig, I was a sophomore in high school when I studied with Craig. He was also teaching at a great place, which unfortunately is no longer around, called the Cambridge Music Center. And actually Joe Stump taught there at that time. It was right near Porter Square in Cambridge. It was a great music store run by these two music lovers, one of whom I'm still in touch with, thankfully, due to Facebook. But upstairs they had lesson rooms. So Craig taught there, and Joe Stump taught there. And Craig made me this tape, bought back before, Spotify and all that. He made me an honest to goodness like mixtape. And it included some absolutely incredible Pat Martino, which ended up being my introduction to Pat Martino's playing. He made a mix. It had Pat Martino playing Lazy Bird, Impressions, the ballad, What Are You Doing the Rest of Your Life? And then some really choice George Benson too, like Billy's Bounce, Low Down and Dirty, great slow blues. And I think some Kenny Burrell as well. So I think I wore this cassette out.
Awesome.
So anyway, it's funny. I saw Craig that first day, which included me playing at the BPC as part of your opening concert.
Right.
I kind of got the chills being on stage, like, because I hadn't been back to the BPC in a long time. In addition to hearing Tuck and Patty there, I also remember, in addition to hearing Dizzy Gillespie there, I also heard Tuck and Patty there, and also John McLaughlin.
Wow.
Relot Gertu, which actually my friends at the Cambridge Music Center presented. Those concerts were a little later when I was in high school. So it had there were a lot of memories for me, and I hadn't been back to go to any shows since I was in high school. So that was kind of my introduction to Berklee. It was actually meeting Jeff Lockhart backstage at the BPC for our little duo set. And, us running through very quickly a couple of the tunes we were going to play. We played a Meters tune, I remember, and a really kind of nasty John Lee Hooker blues that Jeff wanted to do, which was really fun. And then when I looked up, it was really amazing playing with Jeff. I mean, he's become one of my favorite guitar players, and someone that I get a tremendous amount of inspiration from every time I hear him play. I'm always I'm trying to, I'm stealing stuff. And then I looked up, and when we finished our blues, I looked up and there was Mike Stern standing in the wings, kind of arms crossed, but like grinning ear to ear and kind of nodding, and like I was like, okay. And then I met him, and I was like, all right. Well, so that was really my introduction to Berklee. I thought, all right, I feel like we're off to a good start.
I love every part of that story, because the great thing about first day conversations is there's so many more first days than meet the eye. Like, you had a number of first days at Berklee, before, even though people think, oh, well, you just started here, but you didn't. And I think it's hard for people to see when you're at the beginning, and sometimes when you're at the end, how important all these different firsts are. Like, all these people that you met and you knew of that were teachers when you were a kid are now your colleagues. Like, they teach literally across the hall from you.
That's right.
And I think it would be so moving for them to know that you had that mixtape. Like, you remembered what's on the tape that your teacher made for you when you were 14. I remember all that stuff too. And what you were saying about, like, even seeing Tuck and Patty, I got to bring them to guitar sessions at one time, but I fell in love with them when my high school teacher took me to see them in Lenox, Mass. And I met them and they were so nice and they were so inspired and they were just so nice to me that I bought all their records. And then later it was like, hey, you know who would be great for students? Those people. Like, you know, it's like it's a small world literally built on relationships like that, but not always the ones you can see, right? You know, and like somebody being a great musician and also being really good to you makes a huge difference in your whole life. I think that's so cool. And then the way that you're acting with your colleagues when now you're the well-known person is kind of the same way that you were acting with them when you were a kid. Like, hey, look, Mike Stern is here, or I'm having so much fun playing with Jeff Lockhart. And other people will be like, oh my God, it's Mike Stern, it's Jeff Lockhart, it's Chris Bergson. But you guys are like, hey, you want to check this out? Or that's really cool what you did, or I'm going to steal that from you. You know, like, I think it's good for people to see that this is sort of the down-to-earth thing. It's not like networking. It's building on relationships and trying to be good to people as you get better and better at what you're doing.
I love how you put that. I hate the term networking. It's just, yeah. I mean, it should come naturally from connecting with people that where you really share
right
musical values, I think. And it's best when it happens naturally anyway.
Yeah. I mean, so I'm really interested. I wonder if you would talk about your playing a little bit because, first of all, if you're listening to this and you haven't heard Chris play, we'll send some things out and you should check it out. But Chris, you have this really honest, very deep way of playing blues. And obviously you've been doing it for a long time and you sing and you play. And I think like the music that you choose, there's so much life experience that gets shared through the way that you have to express yourself through that music for it to sound authentic in the way that you do it. How did you start to learn that in your life when you were young, as you were like compiling life experience? Like, how did you find, you know, the way that you have to make the music you play sound really authentic? Like, what did you do to get good at that?
That's a good question. I mean, that's a tricky question to answer. I mean, number one, obviously, listening tons and tons to the masters and trying to soak up as much as you can. There's that, obviously, and then some of the people that I was either able to see live or people. And my cat's about to knock over the iPad. We'll see if Winston or Apollo make any cameos today. My two cats.
Yeah, we have to interrupt for 1 second. Do you have cats named Winston and Apollo? That's really cool.
I do. Winston, you want to say hello? Winston really loves music. When I'm practicing, he often will curl up at my feet, and he's very sweet.
Okay, sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
No. So some of it obviously comes from, you know, what you're able to soak up from listening tons to recordings, and going to hear people live is so important. I feel lucky my parents took me to hear so many great artists when I was growing up, especially jazz and blues artists that would come through Boston. And that had a huge influence, that I was already playing guitar and playing music and in bands, but then going to hear amazing players live. And I feel really fortunate because by the time a lot of my friends got into, you know, people like Miles Davis or Joe Pass or whoever, some of those greats had passed on, unfortunately. So that's part of it. I was really moved by one of the quotes that Cheryl shared as part of your amazing tribute to Mick Goodrick, which was just an amazing tribute, by the way. Congratulations to you both. I watched it later from my hotel room one night after our show in Europe. Amazing performances and the tributes, and you guys just did an amazing job kind of putting the whole thing together with the slides of some of Mick's paintings. And one of the quotes that Cheryl shared, because I think that book, The Advancing Guitarist, is just as valuable sort of for some of Mick's philosophy that he shares in there, as well as the more specific musical information. But one of the quotes that Cheryl shared also really resonated with me as well. And I think that relates to what you were asking. And that's the thing about, if you can learn to play from your pain. And I purchased this book when I was in high school, probably from the Berklee College of Music bookstore. And I thought I understood what that meant when I was in high school. But as time has gone on and you live, right? And you do have different experiences, positive and negative, both playing music with different people and in your own life. And that quote, it just continues to resonate with me all the time. And I think it's really, really relevant that if you can draw from your own pain, your own emotional experience when you play music, it will, I think, deepen the emotion that you're expressing through your music. And it will also, it's the part of music where it can really be incredibly cathartic and sort of soul satisfying and healing. And I think that's a piece of it, without going into any like specific, personal, drama or struggles. But, obviously with the pandemic and, some positive things that have come from that, I think for many people, but also for all of us, coming out of this very difficult and challenging time. I ended up writing a bunch of new songs that were inspired by the pandemic. So that's sort of another example. And I talk about this. I've been really enjoying doing a songwriting lab this semester. And I talk about that with my songwriting students. Their first assignment was to write a song that really clearly communicates a sense of place, and to write from what you know. I know that's almost a cliche, but I think it's really important when you're writing. Start with what you either know, what you've personally experienced, or at least what you've personally observed. That usually is going to be your strongest, most honest, most sincere, most emotional offering. So I think that also relates to trying to play from that emotional place. There isn't an easy way to teach someone how to do that. You have to practice doing it. But sometimes I feel that with some of my students. It's like, you just played a nice solo, on a slow blues. But can you go further? Can you dig deeper? You didn't really break a sweat. Like I want to really feel every note you play. I want you to, anyone who's ever, I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but anyone who's ever seen me play live, they know that usually after a couple songs, I'm drenched. And this tends to happen more when I'm playing and singing. Sometimes when I'm just playing, it doesn't happen. I don't want anyone to think I'm phoning it in either. But no, that's the problem with having this very tangible outward thing, is that if I ever do a show and don't soak my shirt, people are gonna be, oh man, I heard Bergson on tour at first set. He wore the same shirt first and second set. He was phoning it in. But that's sort of obviously like a very tangible kind of outward example. But I mean, I think about my heroes, whether it's Muddy Waters or some of my jazz heroes or Freddie King or Aretha. I don't know if you saw that amazing, the amazing Grace concert film. I mean, that was some of the most incredible, moving, emotionally powerful singing I've ever heard. Or I mean, I cried watching it, and I was drained after just watching. Otis Redding, Ray Charles. I mean, these are people where it's like they left it all on the stage. Or Levon Helm, who I was fortunate to work with. I mean, it's just that sense of they were not holding back. There was not like a glib performance where they didn't break a sweat. It's like they gave, 300%, and they just left it all on stage. They're really, really, really giving it up for you, to make you as an audience member hopefully feel something. So those are, I realize, I'm sorry, that's sort of a long-winded answer, but those are some of the things I sort of think about.
Yeah, I think those are great things. And just to underscore them, I think that we're hearing from a lot of people that they're feeling disconnected, either because of the pandemic or in a lot of ways just because of the way we consume information. Like, you used to have to really work to find the stuff. I have to go find the players and see if I can get someone to let me into these shows if I'm not old enough, or you know what I mean, or ask someone for a lesson, or remember calling people on the phone that you didn't know to ask for help. It was like, and like, planning it out, and then you get the number, and then, and you can't, there's no call ID, so they're going to answer. They're not going to know who you are. And then you say something stupid and you feel stupid. And then, it was like a whole thing. And then getting a book or getting a record or getting a tape, or like, it was like all these tapes that we shared and passed around, and you had to work for it. So the whole process was more intense. And we're hearing more and more that people feel disconnected from the two things you mentioned, from the history of what they're doing, like the authenticities of the style and who the players are and the history of the music and what goes into it culturally. And then also, it's everything you're saying about putting yourself into it, accessing who you are as a person and your life experience and what you've gone through, and channeling that in a way that, doesn't break your privacy, but like shares the feelings. I think people are afraid to do that. Like, it's really hard to sit in a room by yourself and access those parts of you. And so I think it's important that you're saying, like, these two things are essentials when you're learning. You have to know where the music comes from and what makes it what it is as a thing, as music that doesn't belong to you. And then you have to know who you are to put yourself into it so you can come through it as well. I think you're right that you can't teach someone to do it, but you're obviously finding ways to facilitate that process for other people and to support them and encourage them and sort of push them into that process. That's a heavy task. Does it feel that way when you're teaching? Does it feel like a bit of a heavy task, or how do you think about it when you're teaching?
Sometimes, I mean, I was thinking about that recently, now that, we're getting near the end of the semester, and thinking about some of the different pieces my students are going to be performing for their proficiencies, sort of thinking about like, okay, you've picked this piece, whether it's a Wes Montgomery solo or a Julian Lage piece. Thinking about some of the things my students will be playing, or a John Mayer tune. So it's sort of asking my students, okay, you picked this piece, you felt passionately about really wanting to learn and get let's sort of zoom out a little bit. Like, what's sort of the larger takeaway here? Like, what made you want to learn this piece? Or like, I asked one of my students the other day, like, how could you, okay, let's say you're doing a gig of your own, and either you play this particular piece, or what from this piece would you take and try and make part of your style? The sort of larger perspective of what made you want to learn this piece, and how can you kind of be inspired by it. You're obviously probably not gonna perform this piece or this solo note for note on your own gig.
Right.
But, you know, we were looking at Wes Montgomery's amazing solo on the live version with the Wynton Kelly Trio on 4 on 6 yesterday. So it's like, okay, you know, are you going to take this phrase or that phrase and look at how it lines up with the chord? You know, what are you sort of getting them to be a little bit more proactive than learning the solo note for note and getting it down, playing it in time with the right phrasing and feel? That's not the end point. That's just like, okay, good. But now what are you going to do with it? What phrases are you now going to practice in all different keys? Or do you see how you could use that phrase over this chord, but also over that chord? Just sort of larger picture. Because sometimes I think young players, and it's understandable, there's so much information that you want to learn and need to learn, but then thinking also like, what do I do with that? Because just learning one Wes Montgomery phrase over a G minor 7 chord, okay.
Right.
What are you going to do with it? And that's where I feel like part of my job as a teacher, is to help them learn it, but then also push them a little bit. Maybe some of them maybe hadn't even thought about that. They're so busy just working on getting it down. They maybe hadn't even thought about like what they might do with it once they really had learned it.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because I think on the flip side, there's a disconnect with the materials too. So we have the fundamental materials, and at Berklee, we organize them into the proficiencies or the final exam materials, like your modes and your intervals and your triads and 7th chords and arpeggios. And so many people feel like, well, I mean, this is getting in my way, or now it's making everything too technical, or now I can't express myself. But how do you get people to see that this is the vocabulary? Like, all of this stuff is the vocabulary so that you can do what you're saying. Like, now it's not just a phrase that Wes Montgomery played one time that you learned, but it's also this scale or arpeggio or a mixture of those things that can work with the G minor 7 chord. So later you could play it on a different G minor 7 chord and do your own thing with it. And, you know, like, how do you help them? It's like a lot of pieces to connect for people who do feel disconnected and overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Like, how do you connect the nuts and bolts part, like the fundamental vocabulary and you know, and also technique and tone production and those things? Like, how do you do that for people?
That's definitely one of the challenges. One of the things that some of my students said they found helpful, which I did last semester, and then I got a request to sort of repeat it this semester. Last semester, I made a sheet with what I consider good fingerings for the modes of C major, good logical fingerings without a lot of shifting. And I did it with fingerings, the names of the notes for each mode, the numbers. I'm trying to encourage my students to think of each mode in terms of numbers, as well as the notes or the patterns. And then also in like on the right side, I put related chords and then examples from recordings with tunes that really use those chords or those sounds. And then I would try and bring in tunes like So What, you know, if when you're working on Dorian, or All the Things You Are is a great tune for level 1, because it uses a lot of the level 1 proficiency chords. Just trying to think of songs that actually use those chords or modes. I mean, the thing that I found is that it's a little more challenging for students that are coming from more of a blues and rock background, where they just aren't used to some of this harmony. They you know, the sound of a major 7 sharp 11 or major 7 augmented chord, you know, they haven't heard that they you know, you aren't going to find that on like a Muddy Waters record. You're just not. So I feel that a teeny bit, from some students. They say, well, do I really need to know this? I don't feel like on one hand, I wish some of my students would be a little more independent and do a little bit more thorough work on the proficiency materials on their own. Some, not all. Some are incredibly driven and self-motivated. For many, I really have to go through it with them slowly, make sure that, some need a teeny bit more hand-holding than others. But I feel like that's one of the challenges for students, that where a lot of the harmony are actually contain new sounds for them. But what I try to tell them, at least from my own experience, and I'm curious for all of you in your experience too. One thing I try to tell them is that you don't always know what gigs you're going to get called to do in your career. Now you could say, hey, I'm a blues rock player, and my goal is I want to form a trio modeled after, like, the John Mayer trio. Obviously, he's very popular these days. And I want to play kind of funky, bluesy pop tunes and sing and play guitar and do that kind of thing. And John Mayer's been successful doing that, and maybe I could be successful doing that. Am I really going to need to use, D Dorian flat 2 on a gig? And, and I think the fair and honest answer is you don't know. And I've certainly been called for gigs that came as a surprise. And you could even say, well, was I the exact right fit for that gig, or was I just filling in for someone? That happens plenty. I tell my students that too. They say, well, do I really need to sight read? Wouldn't I always get the music in advance? Do you ever really need to sight read on a gig? Really? And I say, well, yes, sometimes. But the thing is, if your reading skills aren't happening to the point where you could actually go through a piece slowly and read it accurately at your leisure at home, how do you think you're going to be able to, have a good handle on music that you're sent when you get a call on short notice? Because, hey, can you do this gig? It's 2 days from now. Our guitar player is really sick, or, our guitar player is stuck in wherever. Their flight was canceled. I have 20 tunes to send you. Here's the music. Whereas if you actually have good reading skills, you could be like, cool, I might need to use music on the gig. Maybe I won't be able to memorize 20 tunes in 2 days, but I'm a good reader, and I know how I'm going to approach sort of a Cliff Notes approach of how I'm going to be able to show up and do a good job on this gig. But if you haven't taken the time to actually get those skills together where you can read even like slowly but accurately, then you might as well tell people you don't read at all. And good luck learning 20 hard original jazz tunes by ear on 2 days' notice.
Well, oh, go ahead.
Yeah. What's that phrase your teacher would say? Luck
favors the prepared.
Yeah, luck favors the prepared. I wish, I have many wishes and things that I wish would happen, and every day I'd have espresso delivered to me and all that. But, I got to be prepared for those things like that. And really, your career is a lot of those things, right? You don't know what's going to happen.
I would say that, you can guarantee that you won't have to use something on a gig if you can't do it. You know what I mean? Because no one's going to call you. And then, if I call you and you do the gig that's right down the middle, then the next gig I have, I might ask you if you can do other things, right? I'm not going to go look for the one guy who only does one thing. If I have someone, or the one woman who does one thing, I might go for the person who can do multiple things, who's also cool and shows up, and because I want them to have depth. And I think the real myth, this has come up over and over again this semester, just because you hear someone on a record and you hear them doing one thing, it does not mean that is the only thing they can do. It is much more likely that they can do 1,000 other things. And the way I know that is the way they play that one thing.
Mm-hmm.
I've so had it with people saying to me, "Oh yeah, it's a 3-chord tune. You only need to learn 3 chords." I'm like, no, 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 no. Listen to the way that part is played. It's masterful. That person can play circles around anybody, and they were asked to do this, and they did it beautifully. And then I'm going to bet you that most of those people who are doing that beautifully on that record are doing other things in other ways in other projects. And they're the person you call because you know they're going to be great. And also, you decided to go to music school if you're at Berklee, right? So why not take advantage of learning things? And what if you never play that crazy chord, but because you've heard it, you might use a part of it or a tension note from it to make your dominant chord sound like extra beautiful, or add some color here because there's another guitar player who's playing, a minor 7 flat 5. So what other tensions could you put in the second guitar part that make the whole thing sparkle? Like, why not? Why say no to a tool?
I think that absolutely, and I'm shocked by that. When I occasionally do run into that kind of resistance, like, why are you at age whatever, 18, 19, 20, 21? Why are you limiting yourself? Why are you at this time where this is a perfect time to, like, okay, okay, you're not a great reader right at this moment. That's okay. Like, that's okay. But, like, especially reading, which is you only get better at it by doing it. You can't get better at it by reading philosophical books about doing it. You have to just pick music you've never seen before and put on the metronome. That's what I did. I was studying with Jack Wilkins. I went to Manhattan School of Music, and I said, Jack, I really want to become a better reader. I got tired of being the guitar player that, turned down when the music was given. And it was starting to bum me out. I mean, that's the other thing. And I've talked about this with some of my students. I mean, it can ultimately be bad for your self-esteem as a musician. If you walk around like, oh, I'm not a very good reader, I'm never going to be a good reader. Then, like, because that's kind of what happened to me. That was sort of the final straw for me. I remember being in music school and, like, being in an ensemble, and they handed out like a chart and they wanted me to play the melody. And, like, I didn't feel like I was doing a good job of reading the melody. And then it was time for me to solo on the tune. And I was so bummed out, like, so kind of frustrated with myself, that then when it came time for me to solo something that I felt more confident in my own abilities than in my reading, I was kind of deflated and didn't approach that solo from a very, like, strong place. So it can kind of bring you down in other areas. It's just sort of bad for your self-esteem, but it's like you're wasting all this time feeling bad about this thing that, like, you're saying, like, you're a bad reader, like that's set in stone. I mean, you obviously, you just need to work on it, because I really think anyone could really become a good reader. I mean, most people they just say, I'm not a good reader, like that's set for life, as opposed to, like, I mean, I said that to some of my students, like, why don't you just work on reading, like, half an hour a day, 20 minutes a day for, like, a month, and see where you're at. I guarantee you that you're going to be that much better. I mean, when I told Jack Wilkins I wanted to become a better reader, I said, Jack, what should I do? Because he's a really great reader. He said, well, all right, it's simple. You just need to get some different music. Get some classical music, get some violin books, get some flute books, get some Bach. And you just need to put on the metronome and read for an hour a day, music you've never seen or heard before. And I did that, and it really helped.
So, Chris,
and of course, and reading got more fun.
Are you saying the magic formula is to work on it every day? You heard it here first, folks. Secrets being revealed.
This coffee talk may break the internet, but yes.
Oh my God, that's the secret. That is the special secret.
I mean,
I knew Cheryl. Cheryl, I know you have a lot more to say, so I'm just gonna. You have the floor, Cheryl. Professor Bailey, take us.
Oh, it's very obvious, but there it is, right?
No, there it is. But what? Okay, so Chris and I met through the great Jim Hall, who we both had a connection to and met in New York. And he said, "Hey, you guys should meet each other." And we got together and played. But I'm always, so you know what I'm going to ask you, because I'm always fascinated by this.
I don't actually.
No, well,
Okay.
because I ask you about all the time. Because you were a kid, a teenager,
Okay.
and you had the opportunity to study with Jim Hall. You took some, like, which is kind of rare because he wasn't really into being an educator per se, even though he was so deep and we all learned
Right.
much from him. But in a real traditional sense, and you were able to score these lessons with him. And you always say he showed you some things that he played with Bill Evans. But anyway, just whatever you want to share about that experience of having that opportunity at a young
Sure.
age to come across that guy, that amazing guy, and yeah, what was that like?
Sure. Yeah, I took a handful of lessons with him, most of them when I was about 18, 19, and then one more when I was maybe 22 after I'd been playing a bunch. And I feel like I probably remember almost every word of those lessons. So it was a slightly unusual situation because although he was, I believe, teaching at the new school at the time, um, he wasn't maybe, I think you're right. He wasn't teaching a ton privately. So it actually ended up being through my uncle, funnily enough, who was an, uh, an, an analyst who worked with Jim's wife, Jane. They were part of the same New York-based group of psychoanalysts. And so I don't even know how it came up, but one time my uncle said, the someone I work with who's actually, I think may have even been his boss, is married to someone who I think may be a famous jazz guitarist. I think his name is John Hall. And so I don't know any John Hall, but I mean there is a Jim Hall. And he said, well, let me check on that or whatever. So then it was like it came back. No, it's Jim Hall. And I was already a huge fan. And I ended up hearing him play a number of times, including duo with Ron Carter at the Regatta Bar. So when I was a senior in high school, I ended up basically, so through my uncle and Jim Hall's wife, Jane, I ended up basically getting an audition with Jim, where I would come down to New York City. I think it might have been a weekend where I was already visiting colleges or something. It was my senior year of high school. I went down to New York and I went to Jim's apartment. He lived right near where the new school is in Manhattan. And it was basically like, you're going to have this meeting with Jim, and he's either going to agree to teach you, or because he really doesn't teach a ton, he may recommend someone else for you to study with. And my scene at the time is that I was going to be going to Vassar College in Poughkeepsie in the fall, starting my freshman year. So the plan was that I would either, I could take Metro North, take the train down from Vassar to study with Jim Hall or maybe whoever else he recommended. So I remember this. So I go to his apartment, and he was super, I'm sure I was very nervous, but he was super friendly. He was just such a nice, sweet guy that really put me at ease. I mean, he was just such a sweet, sort of gentle soul. And I remember we played the Days of Wine and Roses, which was one of a handful of tunes that I guess I felt, comfortable with at that time. And I had just seen him play with Ron Carter just a few months before. And I was really blown away that when we played together, I remember Jim closed his eyes. And I just couldn't believe that here I was. He could have been like, all right, kid, let's see what you got. But instead, it was like, all right, we're going to play this tune duo. Cool. And we played, and he closed his eyes, and it was the same guitarist I'd watched play duo with Ron Carter just a couple months before. The same level of concentration and really, really deep listening. And he was such an incredible accompanist as well as being an incredible improviser. And he closed his eyes and did that classic Jim thing where he rolled his volume down, basically getting that really beautiful acoustic guitar tone from his archtop. And it was just an amazing feeling playing with him. I definitely felt transported in a way I've felt since playing with other amazing musicians. But he closed his eyes, and then afterwards he said, well, he said something nice about my playing, which I really appreciated. And he said, well, I've never heard anyone play D flat major 7 as a substitute for B flat minor on that tune before. And I was just sort of like, I remember I left his apartment just like on cloud 9, like Jim Hall liked one of my substitutions. It was probably like one of the only substitutions I knew. And I was like, oh my God. And just to meet him and hang out with him. So he ended up saying, I remember to this day, he had this great Midwestern accent. He's like, well, Chris, it's a long way from Poughkeepsie, but if you want to take the train down, my door's open. And I was like, okay, I do. And then I remember another time I just started, probably once I was already at Vassar and I was starting to think more about maybe moving to New York City. And I remember I was just bombarding Jim with questions like an excited, 18-year-old would, like, what about getting gigs in New York? And what's the New York jazz scene? I had just been to Smalls, which just opened recently. This was in 1994. And there was like a real resurgence of interest in straight ahead jazz at that time in New York. So I was just bombarding him with questions. And he said, well, Chris, to be honest with you, at this point in my career, I actually only play in New York City a couple times a year, when I play at the Vanguard. So I can't even really answer these questions of, gigs and all this stuff. He said, but why don't I connect you with a really good young guitar player who knows the scene? And next thing I know, he gets Peter Bernstein on the phone. So I'm at Jim's apartment, and he said, well, let me call this young guitar player. This guy was a student of mine, and he plays great. And I'd actually already heard Peter Bernstein on record, so I was just like, oh, well, okay. So then Jim gets Peter Bernstein on the phone, and sure enough, Peter Bernstein has a gig that night. And so I go down to the Cupping Room Cafe in Soho, and Peter Bernstein's playing trio with Grant Stewart on saxophone and Omer Avital on bass, just playing tunes in the corner of this restaurant. And then so I ended up meeting Peter Bernstein. He became a good friend and a mentor as well. I see he's coming to Berklee on Monday, which is awesome. I happen to have a break the first half of his master class, so I'm excited for that. But so through Jim, I met him, and Jim shared a lot of wisdom. I still remember some of the things he said about time, because I asked him, I was trying to work on deepening and improving my time. I said, how did you work on, you have such incredible time. You play such great rhythm guitar, how did you develop that? And he talked about how much he was influenced and modeled his own playing after Freddie Green's playing. And he talks about that in his book. But then he said something that really stuck with me. He said, the way I see time, I never, ever worry about it, ever. I see time as like a constant pulse, a constant river that you just tune into, and you create the time with the people that you're playing with in that moment. And I think that I found that to be very true. And I think he was obviously talking, coming from a jazz perspective, but I think that's true regardless of what music or what genre you play. And that's something I think about a ton, whether I'm playing trio with bass and drums, duo with another guitar player, duo with a bass player, accompanying a singer, just me, that you want to just agree, be really, ears wide open, listening, and that you create that time together. And he, obviously Jim is famous for this very conversational approach to playing and improvising. You hear it on those amazing duo records he made with Bill Evans.
Well, I mean, coming from him though, he was so famous for duets. I mean, even with Wayne Shorter and Red Mitchell and Ron.
Oh yeah.
Because I always thought that was a testament to his time, that you didn't need a bass player and drummer if you have Jim Hall to play with. So that's really interesting, his thoughts about the time, how he's listening and feeling the time all the time. All the time. He's on time all the time. He's always there with the time.
Yep. I mean, the only thing I would add is I'm thinking about, I was sharing this with a student recently, and the only thing I would add is that someone at Jim Hall's level, he's probably also at, for the past, 40, 50 years, he probably had also only played with people that also had incredible time too. I mean, he probably wasn't often in situations where it's like, why, quit dragging, Ron, that's not right. I mean, he is in a place where, he's playing amongst equals, but still, I mean, I don't think it's too early to have that trust, as long as you're playing with people that have a good groove and a good time feel. But that's a very musical way to play with others, as opposed to, here it is, you got to come to me, I'm not budging a bit, I hear where you are, but I'm right. I mean, just that we all have to have that give and take, I think, when we play with people. I mean, that's just how you play well with others, right?
Ian, what about you? What's on your mind? Maybe this is a good time to throw your question in the mix here.
Yeah. I mean, I love that bit about the time, and it probably shouldn't take for granted the level of musicians, that are around you and there. But yeah, so there's a question that we ask everybody on this podcast, that is, what is something that students should be thinking about that they might not be thinking about, or something that might not be on their radar, like a question that they should be asking that they might not think to ask?
That's a good question. I mean, I mean, one, it's sort of obvious, but yet, as I kind of said before, one is obviously like what do you want to do in an ideal world with as a musician? I think it is important to have a clear sense of, and obviously that can change. But what do you want to do? You're developing your skills, you're amassing this body of information. What do you ultimately want to do? If someone gave you, if someone said, I will grant you one wish and you can have the gig of your dreams, what would it be? Because some students, I feel actually aren't thinking about that. They're learning a tune for their proficiency, but maybe they're not really thinking about what is the application of that? I mean, I say that to some of my students, let's say you're someone who just really, really, you kind of want to play like Stevie Ray Vaughan, note for note, that's what you wake up really inspired to do. I mean, we've all gone through that with different players. I think that's a necessary skill. You have to copy people, right? You have to say, I really like that person's sound and feel and their kind of phrases they play. You have to copy that note for note. And then eventually that becomes just one piece of your own style. And you're going to eventually put all those different pieces together in your own way. But sometimes, I remember watching a video of myself from some gig I did when I was 18, 19. And every tune I was going into the octaves, trying to play like Wes, playing a big L5. And I remember watching this video, and this is one of the reasons I guess it's also good to, watch and listen to recordings of yourself. After watching this, I was like, man, I'm doing this on every single tune. Like, this is too much. I'm using this one kind of technique on every single tune, and I'm not doing it as well as Wes. And what am I doing here? I love Wes Montgomery, but like, I can't just do that on every tune. Like, this isn't really working. You need to do that on like one tune or a couple tunes, but you can't just do that, the Wes Montgomery template for a solo, single notes, octaves, chords on every single tune. Like, that's just the only way you have to approach soloing. So in that moment, it was sort of illustrative to actually see and being like, okay, enough. You need to add something else. But I guess I think just thinking about like, what is the sort of real world application? Because if someone is only just copying Stevie Ray Vaughan or Wes Montgomery note for note, I would just say to them, that's cool. And you're going to learn a lot from doing that. And that's valid. But what are you ultimately going to do with that? Where do you see that? How do you kind of fit that into the, I hate to use the term marketplace, but you have to think a little bit about that. I think, right? Like, I mean, you have to think like, what are some of the things that sort of sets you apart as a guitar player, as a musician?
I think that's right. I think that's worth thinking about. And I think all these things are really important, because I think if they seem really straightforward, a lot of the advice that you've given, but they're all the things that people disregard or they don't think about. And it's really good to hear that these are fundamental things. Just thinking about how you want to sound, what you're working on, how you're working on it. What is your perception of yourself? If you're saying, like you said before, like, I can't do something, well, why not just practice it then? Instead of stressing out about it. But of course, right? Of course, that's the secret, but that's not something that's always going to come up for people as the first response.
I see that a lot with students, and I don't know if some of it is human nature, maybe, to be scared of things that are harder or that maybe you think don't come as naturally. But I've also seen, both with my own kind of process over the years and with students I've worked with, that sometimes someone comes in and is, weak in a certain area. And by really focusing on that area, that becomes one of their ultimate strengths. And they might even, like, let's say someone who really came in and you said, wow, you really need to work on your rhythm and your time. But let's say they really do. And then maybe they become one of the world's most in-demand accompanists. And they become known as like a really killer rhythm guitar player. Oh, actually, that's another thing I would add to your question, Ian. As some students have kind of asked me, and I've said, I would say, don't forget to develop your accompanying and rhythm guitar skills. See, I see that a lot with my more blues-oriented students. They've clearly spent more time like learning lead phrases than they have actually thinking about how many different ways can I comp on a shuffle in A, playing a 12-bar blues in A. I see that with a number of my students, and I sometimes try and push them in that way. I say, we were just playing, and you just played the same turnaround and the same voicings and the same rhythmic pattern for 6 choruses on a 12-bar blues shuffle in a row. And sometimes they didn't even realize that. Sometimes they don't even realize there are other things you can do. They're like, oh, well, isn't that how you play a shuffle? Isn't shuffle dun, 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 dun? And you say, well, I'm going to turn you on to a little Walter record. And I want you to listen to what the guitar player, whether it was Jimmy Rogers or, one of the Myers, the Lewis Myers, I want you to check out the kind of accompaniment they're playing. And they're actually playing very interesting, kind of sophisticated stuff. So like, I feel like that's one of my ultimates for a lot of my students. Like, let me hear you play a shuffle and let me hear you comp. because most of the time the soloing tends to be way more advanced than the rhythm guitar playing and the accompanying. But I think it's just a question of what they've worked on more, and maybe no one's ever really encouraged them to. Yeah, hey, here are some things you can add that are really gonna take your rhythm guitar playing to the next level. Maybe
Or
they've
it
just
seems
thought,
basic to them, like maybe rhythm guitar, well, that's just the rhythm guitar part. They take it for granted and don't see how deep it is, right?
less glory in it, maybe.
Yes, but it
Yeah.
always shows in the single line.
True.
They're the same. They're the same, actually.
That's true.
You in 2 bars you can tell if someone's a good rhythm guitarist from the way they play a melody. So that's another truth we just revealed here on Coffee Talk.
There's a lot of truth today. I think before we tell all the truths of guitar, we might have to wrap up this pot of coffee. So Cheryl Bailey, what's your thought as we're wrapping it up?
Well, thanks for you shared a couple of stories about Jim Hall that I didn't know that were great. But also, I love what you're saying. You said this term networking, whatever. Yes, it's kind of a corporate term, but everything that we talked about today in terms of like how you even met Jim Hall or how we met or how you came to Berklee was all about connections and the hang, right? Just the hang. And that's how
Yeah.
that's how it happens, right?
What? Yeah, I mean, you all are examples of people that are awesome, amazing, very inspiring musicians, but who are also really awesome, amazing, really good people. I mean, that would be the last thing I would say to any students watching this is like, be a good person. Like I've recently made some changes in my own band in New York because I just thinking, man, nah, like that kind of attitude, I'm not comfortable with that anymore. I don't want to hear you, say nasty things about people behind their back if it's musicians that we all play with. No, I have no time for that. Just to be a good person, be a team player, be someone that like looks out for everyone else in the band. Because the thing is, like, there's so many good musicians out there that wouldn't you all agree that if like you're trying to pick someone to either come teach at Berklee or pick a musician you want to play with or collaborate with, let alone go on tour with for an extended period of time, you want to pick people that are really great musicians, yes, but also that are going to be good people, that are going to really be like good people to be on your team, good people to work with, people that like, I just finished this really fun tour in Europe and I was really struck by not only what great players everyone was, but also what nice people and what a team effort it felt like musically and otherwise, like people really looking out for one another on the road, like helping each other out, being supportive. And it really, you all have toured and played all over the world. You know what it's like when you have a 10-hour drive and you got to get out of the car and go right to sound check and play. When you've been spending the day with people that you like, that are really nice, good people, it's just, and that really relates to hireability. When people are choosing people to hire, there's just so many good musicians. I think you would have to be the next Jaco Pastorius or Jimi Hendrix or Eddie Van Halen or Wes Montgomery for someone to be like, that person is a total jerk, is so difficult, but they are just so good. And they're the only person on the planet that can play X or Y, that I know they're going to be a total pain in the butt, but I'm going to hire them even though, because otherwise I think we would all rather, do that 10-hour drive with someone that's going to be a nice, cool person. So I think that is a really important, just being a nice, good person is really important.
Yeah, you can't say that enough. That's another secret revealed on Coffee Talk. It's really true. It's like the hidden truth, right? Ian, what about you? What's on your mind?
Yeah, amen. That's the truth, right? Yeah, and also like I guess when I was a student, I was so insecure about my playing that I might be unaware of how I'm treating other people or how I'm coming off, right? That like worrying about your playing a little too much might make you seem a little antisocial, right?
Mm.
And that if you played with people and you're just like, oh man, I didn't like the way I played on that thing, or like I didn't play this one passage very well, or whatever, and like puts you in a bad mood, you might not realize that you're kind of like bringing the vibe down, right? And that like be cool with the rest of the band, even if, you know, you think you could have played that better. Like that's just for you to go home and work on more, right? Like still be a cool good person even if it's like you're just being, you know, anyway, for sure.
It's really true. I mean, sometimes we'll get to talk to alums or, people come, Chris, like you did, you come in after having all these connections with Berklee and people know who you are. And I always love to ask people who recommend someone, like, what is it? What do you remember about that person? And then sometimes ask the person, like, what's your impression of what people might have remembered about you, who recommended you? And it's always different. It's the person who's recommending, it's always like that time that you were so great, or that time you really listened, or that time you said something that, made me feel great, or you saved my life one day because you came in and you played this thing, and then when you ask the person, what do you think people remembered about you? At first they go to, oh, I don't know, maybe it was that record, or maybe it was, that thing I played at the gig. And it, like, we all have that self-consciousness where you're always like worrying about every single note that you chose. And provided you've done all the work, that you mentioned before, it's always the other things that go into it. It's almost like the given is that you're going to be a great player and be so distinctive and unique in yourself. But then among those people, it's how you treat everybody else. So thanks for stressing that point. I think it's important as we're all getting tired at the end of the semester to remember that. Remember that,
Be
everyone.
nice.
Well, thank you, Chris. Thanks for being here with us today.
Thank you. I've been loving teaching at Berklee, and this has been a great first year, and this was fun. Thanks for having me on Coffee Talk.
Great. So we're going to keep hanging out, but we want to say thank you, Cheryl Bailey, for being here with everybody, and thanks, Ian. Thanks, Chris. And if you're listening or watching, we'll be with you on the next Coffee Talk.